So we are finally at the end of this particular wave of Marvel Legends. We have got our Build-A-Figure Sauron here, and since there's no packaging, we're just going to jump right into it this time. And after this review, if you're interested in snatching him up and grabbing this whole wave, you know the drill. Head on over to Big Bad Toy Store. I will put a link down below. But this is a figure that I find very interesting for a number of reasons. You know, it's a weird character. It's not necessarily an A-lister X-Men villain, but he is very well known. Specifically if you were a big fan of the cartoon show, because he had a pretty good role there. But he also is an interesting looking figure, and he's very interesting from a parts reuse perspective because Hasbro dug really deep in terms of getting this guy made. So we're going to take a look at articulation first, see how he moves around, and then we're going to take a look at sculpt because obviously there's a whole bunch of stuff going on here. This guy is massive. He is humongous. I mean, just look at these wings. So yeah, let's just dig into articulation. Okay, now as far as moving this guy around, he is mostly what you would expect to get from a Legends figure, but he is also, if you're not familiar with older stuff, he is a little different, and I'll talk about why he's that way in a moment. But as far as moving him around, you can rotate the head, you can go up and down. The jaw is articulated, which is fantastically done. You don't see any of the interior of the neck. You only see the mouth. And then on the underside, you can actually see a little bit of his top jaw, but that's okay. Not a big deal. You're really not going to be looking at that direction too much. The neck is articulated, so you can move it around a little bit. The arms go all the way out. They can rotate all the way around. There's nothing impeding them there. We've got kind of a soft ratchet joint in the arm. We've got a bicep swivel. We've got single jointed elbows, but they're pretty solid. They go very, very far for a single joint. And then the wings are molded in such a way that they do have a point of articulation, each wing. So we've got part of the wing that's sculpted on the bicep, part on the forearm, and then this section here, the final section, is actually pegged into a cavity that is sculpted onto the forearm. So you just pop it in there. You could remove it if you needed to. And then you can move them back and forth, so you can retract them or you can extend them. You can extend them further than you need to, but yeah, they kind of have a limiting factor there. You'd want to keep them about that far apart. But I mean, look at that wingspan. It's pretty wild. He has quite a bit of girth to him in that regard. So you've got movement on the wings. We have got a diaphragm swivel, so he can go all over the place. I mean, look at all that range of motion. He can go all over. We've got, and this is where I'm going to take this off. This is where we're talking about the old style articulation. We've got ball jointed legs here. So, you know, you've got those old balls with the hinges on them. So you can go all over, forward, backward, all the way out. Thigh cut, double jointed knees, of course, a hallmark of Legends. And then we've got hinge and rocker down there at the ankles. So he does move around quite a bit. You know, the only real thing is that he is he's a lot of parts reuse, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But that obviously factors into some of his articulation, specifically the crotch area and, you know, those legs. He does, of course, have the tail, and the tail has kind of a butt crack going on here because you have the way you peg him in. So you can move the tail up and down, and then you can rotate it. It's not bendy or anything. It's just molded in a certain way, but you can move it up and down, expose more of the crack depending on how you're doing this, but it does help with stability in some situations if you need to pose it and set it on the ground. But he does have a lot of articulation in a general sense. I do dig the way that the wings move and they look really well done. The only real gripe is just the legs down here, but it's just it's kind of a factor that had to play in because of where they got all these parts from. Now in the looks department, this figure is pretty wild. Honestly, I'm very, very, very happy. I'm a big fan of Sauron. It's a dinosaur man. I mean, how could you really not like him? He's very different in terms of what an X-Men villain is, and that always kind of drew me towards him. I like dinosaurs too, so that kind of helps. But like I said, this guy has a lot of parts reuse, and frankly, they really dug deep to get a body for this guy. So this is something that, you know, was pointed out kind of when he surfaced, is where a lot of him comes from. You know, his wings and his head and, you know, some of his arms are all new, specific to this particular figure. But the bulk of this guy is actually the lizard figure, not the current figure in Legends, not even a Legends figure at all. A lizard figure from the Amazing Spider-Man movie line. So the movie that came out, what, 6-ish years ago, something like that, when they tried to reboot the Spider-Man movie universe. And this is where most of this comes from. That's also why we have these old style hips and legs. So that's really really interesting. I find it very odd. It works pretty well. I don't think the body in general works perfectly. Birds usually have larger pecs, or what would be pecs, so he should have more of like a V superhero shape. But in general, I'm really, really happy with it, despite the fact that it is tremendously odd parts reuse, especially for something so old and not even really in the same line. I think Hasbro did a good job of repurposing this. I'm not mad at all. I'm not upset in any way. I think if you can do it, and it works well here. He looks very much like what I would have expected a Legends Sauron to look like. These wings, I mean, they are just something else. He looks fantastic. We've got translucent plastic, so you can see how the flesh is kind of stretched and thin on the outer edges of the wings, and it's just huge. I mean, the figure itself, he's about 8 inches tall, and the wingspan is, even more than that. It's a tremendous figure. The head sculpt, I think, is really, really well done. He looks very much like a pterodactyl man. Like I said, I've already mentioned the open mouth because of the articulated jaw, and it's sculpted really well. You can see some gnarly teeth in there with his tongue. We've got the dark eye sockets with the red eyes there. We've got the loincloth, which works pretty well, and it honestly hides the ugliness that goes on with the joints down there, because personally I'm not a fan of this style joint. So we've got the loincloth with the rope belt and then some pouches and stuff. And then on the back side of him, you can see, again, we've got the butt crack again, and we've got the tail, which I think looks really good. I dig this particular tail piece that they used, and just the way, even from the back, these wings look good, despite the fact that it's, a plate system and that things have to overlap. I understand why they do this, and, the engineering behind it makes perfect sense. You can see some tears where it looks like the wings are tattered and worn and old, but everything about it just is fantastic. Apocalypse up till now has been my favorite Build-A-Figure of this year. This guy is really rivaling him at this point, because I think it's just so well done. It may be some weird, crazy parts reuse, but from the paint to the sculpt on him to everything, really everything about this figure is fantastic. I'm very, very pleased with everything they did here. I had to get through 3 Deadpools that I didn't want to get the parts for this guy, but at the end of the day, I'm glad I did, because he is really, really nice. There's just not anything bad to say about him. I think this might be Build-A-Figure of the year. Not sure. Apocalypse is still my favorite of the characters, but objectively speaking, this figure is among the best things Hasbro has done all year for sure. Now, since we're done with this wave, it's of course time to take a look at the wave itself to see our spread of figures, and then I'm going to do my thing where I've been ranking them lately. So we've got our 6 figures plus the Build-A-Figure making 7. So we've got Bishop, Wolverine, Chillpool, X-Men Deadpool, Lady Deadpool, Omega Red, and then we've got our Build-A-Figure. Now, I've said multiple times at this point as I've been talking about these figures, I think that the Deadpool thing is about done. I hope it is. I'm exhausted in terms of Deadpool figures. I think it's just gotten a little bit crazy, and this wave has really shown us that. So as far as my preference in terms of these figures, it's going to be X-Men Deadpool at the bottom, Lady Deadpool following that. And honestly, you could really probably switch them. This figure is just boring and goofy. This figure is just not very good. Then we've got the boxer brief Deadpool, Chillpool as some people call him. He's okay. I mean, it's different. He's goofy. He's funny, and I like the comedic aspect going on there. So I like the boxer shorts. The sculpt's pretty good on him. I just didn't need that figure. Then we've got Wolverine X-23, and it's mostly because she's not bad compared to these 3. She has plenty of problems, at least my particular figure does, but I'm going to have to put her middle of the pack. And then honestly, kind of shifting far off, these 3 are definitely way down here. X-23, Wolverine's about here, but all the way over here we'll have Bishop. This is a figure I've long been waiting for. He may still be on that Hyperion body, which isn't a positive, but it's also not a negative for him. It works surprisingly well. And then I'm going to go with the Build-A-Figure. Sauron is a fantastic Build-A-Figure, awesome reuse of parts. I still can't get over the fact that they were able to do that. It's just so weird. But he looks fantastic. Very much looks like I remember him from the comics. And honestly, he would have been number 1 if it wasn't for the fact that Omega Red is in this wave. This new body, everything about this figure is just a cut above. And I'm very biased. My bias has to come in here. I like the character. I like this figure, and he just looks so damn cool. So these 2 are very, very, very close to each other, but it's a good, the top 3 is a definitely good selection of figures, and then you got this stuff down there at the bottom. So at the end of the day, this Build-A-Figure is a definite winner. I don't really have too much more to say about this guy. He looks cool. He's pretty well articulated despite the older style joints, but they're hidden, so I'm okay with that. He's got translucent plastic. He's tall. He's got humongous wingspan. And honestly, he's just a solid figure, and he looks really good. He'd have been the top spot in the wave if it wasn't for Omega Red, and that's really only because I like Omega so much. The only real downside is that you've got to suffer through 3 Deadpools in this wave, unless you're a huge Deadpool fan. I am not that kind of fan, so I definitely did not want to have to buy those figures. I did it anyway, and here I am. I've got a fantastic Build-A-Figure as a result of that. So I would recommend snatching him up if you haven't done so already. So that's going to do it for this look at the Marvel Legends Sauron Build-A-Figure and Wave from Hasbro. Let me know what you guys think. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and share, and until next time.